When Emma's mother dies from cancer, she thinks her world has ended. But billionaire CEO Alexander Kane offers her an impossible deal. Marry him in a fake arrangement to fool his imprisoned father and save his dying sister Sophia. What starts as a cold business transaction in the sterile halls of Manhattan's most powerful company becomes a desperate race across Prague's ancient streets, where love and deception intertwine in ways neither expected. Asterisk, the champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of Alexander Kane's penthouse office, crystal shards catching the dying light of Manhattan's skyline. Emma Rosewood stood frozen in the doorway, her resignation letter trembling in her hand as she watched her billionaire boss pour himself another drink with hands that weren't quite steady. Don't, his voice cut through the silence like broken glass. Whatever noble speech you've prepared about finding new opportunities, just don't. The city sprawled 40 floors below them, its lights beginning to twinkle in the November dusk. Emma had worked as Alexander's personal assistant for 3 years, long enough to recognize the dangerous stillness that preceded his legendary storms. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the infamous Ice King of Kane Industries looked almost human. "My mother died this morning," she said simply. Alexander's hand stilled on the whiskey bottle. When he turned, his gray eyes held something she'd never seen before. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. As if he understood the particular weight of losing the only person who'd ever truly mattered. "The experimental treatment in Switzerland," he said. "It didn't work." Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd emptied her savings, sold everything she owned, even accepted a loan from Alexander that she'd planned to spend the rest of her life repaying. Catherine Rosewood had fought for 8 months, but cancer was a crueler master than any billionaire. "I'm sorry," Alexander said, and for once his words didn't sound rehearsed. "I can't stay," Emma managed. "I can't pretend to care about quarterly reports and board meetings when she's gone. Can't pretend any of this matters." Alexander moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, his reflection ghost-like against the darkening sky. At 34, he commanded a financial empire worth $50 billion. But Emma had always sensed the hollowness beneath his perfectly tailored armor. Tonight, that hollowness seemed to fill the entire room. "What if I told you," he said quietly, "that I need you to save someone too?" Emma's laugh was bitter. "You don't need anyone, Mr. Kane. That's your superpower. My sister is dying." The words hung in the air like a confession. Emma had worked for Alexander for 3 years and never heard him mention family. His official biography claimed no living relatives. His penthouse held no photographs, no personal mementos, no evidence that Alexander Kane had ever loved or been loved by another human being. "Her name is Sophia," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's 26, an artist living in Prague under an assumed name. She's been hiding from our father for 8 years, and now she has maybe 6 months to live without a bone. Marrow transplant." Emma sank into the leather chair across from his desk, her resignation letter forgotten. "What does this have to do with me?" Alexander turned from the window, and in the dim light, he looked younger, more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "Our father is Marcus Kane. Perhaps you've heard of him?" Every muscle in Emma's body went rigid. Marcus Kane, the pharmaceutical mogul whose company had been exposed for hiking insulin prices by 3,000%. Marcus Kane, who'd testified before Congress with a smirk while diabetic children died. Marcus Kane, whose empire had crumbled in spectacular fashion 6 months ago when whistleblowers revealed decades of illegal human experimentation. "He's in federal prison," Emma whispered. "For the next 40 years, if justice has any meaning." Alexander's jaw tightened, but he still controls a fortune hidden in offshore accounts. "Money Sophia needs to survive, so access it. I can't." Alexander moved to his desk, pulling out a thick manila folder. "When I testified against him, when I handed over evidence that put him behind bars, he wrote me out of everything. Legally, financially, biologically. In his eyes, I died the day I chose to be human instead of a monster." Emma's mind reeled. Alexander Kane, the man she thought was motivated purely by greed and power, had destroyed his own father to stop a pharmaceutical genocide. The complexity of it stole her breath. "He'll only release the funds," Alexander continued, "to a daughter-in-law. Someone he approves of, someone he believes he can control. Someone pure enough to redeem the Kane family name in his twisted mind." Understanding crashed over Emma like ice water. "You want me to marry you? I want you to save my sister's life." Alexander opened the folder, revealing photographs of a young woman with dark hair and gentle eyes, painting in a sun-drenched studio. "She's good, Emma. She feeds stray cats and volunteers at refugee centers and has never hurt anyone. She doesn't deserve to die because of our father's sins." Emma studied Sophia's photographs, seeing in her face an innocence that war and loss hadn't quite managed to destroy. She thought of her own mother, how Catherine had fought so hard to live, how she'd whispered Emma's name with her final breath. What would this marriage entail? Alexander's expression hardened back into its familiar mask. 6 months. Long enough to convince my father you're legitimate, to access the accounts, to get Sophia the treatment she needs. You'd live here, attend functions as my wife, play the role of reformed grieving widow who's made me want to be a better man. And then you disappear with enough money to never work again. Start fresh somewhere else. Build whatever life you want. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. The offer was impossible, insane, completely at odds with everything she thought she knew about Alexander Kane. But as she looked at Sophia's photographs, she saw her own mother's face in those final moments, desperate and afraid and running. "Out of time? Why me?" she asked. "Because you understand what it means to lose someone you love," Alexander said simply. "Because you won't mistake this for something it isn't. And because despite everything you've seen of my world, you still have something my father will recognize as genuine goodness." Emma closed her eyes, feeling the weight of another impossible choice. 6 months of pretending to love a man who treated emotions like business transactions. 6 months of living a lie that might save a stranger's life. When she opened her eyes, Alexander was watching her with an intensity that made her skin burn. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "and your father realizes this is fake, what happens to Sophia?" Alexander said, "And I live with the knowledge that I failed the only person who ever believed I could be something other than my father's son." Emma looked out at the city lights, thinking of all the lives lived behind those windows. All the desperate choices made in moments like this. Somewhere in Prague, a young woman was painting her last masterpieces, not knowing that her life hung in the balance of this conversation. "Okay," Emma whispered.
"I'll do it."
Alexander's relief was so profound, she could feel it across the room. But when he spoke, his voice was steady, professional. "We'll need to make this believable. My father will have us investigated, watched, tested. He'll want to see genuine emotion, real chemistry. Can you handle that?" Emma met his gaze, seeing, for the first time, the man behind the mask. Broken, desperate, haunted by sins that weren't entirely his own. She thought she could probably fall in love with that man if she weren't careful. "Can you?" she asked. Something flickered in Alexander's gray eyes, something dangerous and electric that made Emma's breath catch. For a moment, the space between them hummed with possibility, with the kind of connection that could destroy them both. Then Alexander looked away, and the moment shattered like crystal against marble. "The wedding is tomorrow," he said. "We leave for Prague immediately after." Prague's ancient streets glistened with November rain as Emma followed Alexander through the narrow cobblestone alleys of Mala Strana. The Gothic spires of the cathedral pierced the gray sky like accusatory fingers, and Emma pulled her coat tighter against the cold that seemed to seep through her bones. They'd been married for exactly 18 hours. The ceremony at City Hall had been clinical, efficient, witnessed only by Alexander's lawyer and a court clerk who'd looked bored throughout the entire proceeding. Emma still wore the simple white dress she'd bought that morning, now wrinkled from travel. Platinum wedding band on her finger felt like a shackle made of ice. "She doesn't know," Alexander said, as they approached a converted warehouse studio. "About the marriage, about father, about any of it. As far as Sophia knows, you're my assistant who became something more after your mother's death. Grief brought us together." Emma nodded, though the irony wasn't lost on her. In a way, it was the truth. The studio occupied the top floor of a building. that had probably stood since the Middle Ages. Sophia Kane answered the door in clothes splattered with paint, her dark hair twisted into a messy bun. She was smaller than Emma had expected, more fragile, with the translucent skin of someone whose body was consuming itself from within. "Alex," Sophia breathed, and threw herself into her brother's arms. Emma watched Alexander's carefully constructed mask crumble. His embrace was fierce, desperate, the grip of someone trying to hold on to something precious that kept slipping away. When Sophia pulled back, tears streaked through the paint on her cheeks. "You came," she whispered. "I promised I would." Alexander's voice was rough with emotion. "Sophia, I want you to meet Emma, my wife." Sophia's eyes widened, darting between them with curiosity and something that looked like hope. "Wife. Alex, you didn't tell me you were seeing anyone?" "It happened quickly," Emma said, stepping forward with what she hoped was a believable smile. "We've known each other for years, but after my mother passed, Alexander helped me through the grief. We realized what we had was more than professional." It wasn't entirely a lie, Emma realized, but Alexander had helped her in his own complicated way. Sophia studied Emma's face with an artist's keen eye.
"You love him?"
The statement wasn't a question, and Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. She glanced at Alexander, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. "Yes," Emma said softly. "I do." Alexander's intake of breath was barely audible, but Emma caught it. Their eyes met for a moment that stretched too long, filled with something neither of them was prepared to name. "I'm so happy," Sophia said, clasping Emma's hands. "Alex has been alone for so long. I was starting to think he'd forgotten how to let anyone in." The studio was an explosion of color and life. Canvases lined the walls, depicting everything from Prague's fairy tale architecture to abstract explosions of emotion. Sophia's talent was undeniable, her work pulsing with a vitality that stood in stark contrast to her increasingly frail appearance. "These are incredible," Emma said, pausing before a painting of a young girl feeding pigeons in Wenceslas Square. The child's face held such joy, such innocent wonder, it nearly brought tears to Emma's eyes. "Art is the only honest thing left in the world," Sophia said. "People lie, governments lie, but a painting can't pretend to be something it's not." Felt the weight of her own deception like a stone in her chest. "Sometimes people lie to protect the ones they love, do they?" Sophia tilted her head, studying Emma with those two knowing eyes. "Or do they lie to protect themselves from the truth?" Alexander moved between them, his jaw tight. "Sophia, you look tired. Have you been eating?" "Don't hover, big brother." But Sophia's smile was affectionate. "I'm fine. The treatments are helping." Emma saw Alexander and Sophia exchange a look loaded with meaning. The treatments weren't helping. They both knew it, but they were playing their own game of pretense, protecting each other from a truth too terrible to speak aloud. That evening, they had dinner at a small restaurant tucked away in Old Town Square. Sophia regaled them with stories of Prague's artistic community, her eyes bright with fever and determination to live every moment fully. Emma found herself genuinely charmed by the young woman's wit and warmth. "So tell me," Sophia said, over dessert, "how did Alex propose?" "I bet it was terribly unromantic." Emma's spoon clattered against her bowl. She hadn't prepared for this question. "Actually," Alexander said smoothly, "it was in my office." "Very cliché, I'm afraid." "Liar," Sophia laughed. "Alex doesn't do cliché. Come on, Emma, the real story." Emma looked at Alexander, seeing something vulnerable in his expression. He was trusting her with this moment, this fiction that might be the last happy memory his sister would have of him. "He was devastated after my mother died," Emma said slowly. "I'd never seen him like that before, so human and raw. He told me he couldn't bear to lose anyone else he cared about. Then he got down on one knee, right there in his office, and said he knew it was crazy, but he loved me, and he wanted whatever time we had left to matter." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "That's beautiful." Alexander was staring at Emma with an expression she couldn't read. For a moment she wondered if her fictional proposal had hit closer to the truth than either of them were comfortable with. "I should go," Sophia said, gathering her coat. "Early morning at the gallery tomorrow." as they walked her home through Prague's enchanted streets. Emma noticed how Alexander matched his pace to his sister's increasingly labored steps. Sophia was dying, probably faster than she was letting on. "I like her," Emma said later, as they stood on the balcony of their hotel suite. The city spread out below them like a jeweled tapestry, the Vltava River catching moonlight like scattered diamonds. "She likes you too." Alexander joined her at the railing, close enough that she could smell his cologne and the lingering scent of Prague's ancient stones. "She hasn't smiled like that in months. How long does she really have?" Alexander's hands gripped the iron railing until his knuckles went white. 6 weeks, maybe 8 if we're lucky. The confession hung between them like a death sentence. Emma felt tears sting her eyes for this young woman she barely knew. This stranger whose life had somehow become entangled with her own. "We have to make this work," she whispered. "I know." Alexander turned to face her, and in the moonlight his face looked carved from marble. "Emma, what you said tonight about the proposal. Why did you—" He stopped, shaking his head. "Why did I what?" "Nothing. It's not important." But it was important. Emma could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way he couldn't quite meet her eyes. She'd told that story with more emotion than their arrangement called for, and they both knew it. "Alexander," she began, then stopped. As her phone buzzed with an incoming message, the text was from an unknown number. But the words made Emma's blood run cold. "I know what you're doing. My son thinks he's clever, but I have eyes everywhere. You have 3 days to prove you're worthy of the Kane name, or the girl dies and you disappear. Don't test me." Emma's hands shook as she showed Alexander the message. His face went deadly. "Pale, he knows we're here," Alexander said. "Somehow he knows." From somewhere in the distance came the sound of breaking glass and a woman's scream. Alexander's phone rang immediately. "Alex," Sophia's voice was barely audible, thick with tears. "Someone broke into the studio. They destroyed everything. My paintings, everything I've worked for." There was a note. Alexander gripped the phone so tightly Emma thought it might shatter. What did it say? 3 days to prove she's real, or next time it won't just be the paintings. The maximum security federal prison in Colorado felt like descending into the mouth of hell. Emma's heels clicked against polished concrete as guards led them through a maze of reinforced doors and security checkpoints. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made her skin look corpse pale. "Remember," Alexander murmured as they approached the visiting room. "He'll try to get inside your head. That's what he does. He finds your weakness and twists it until you break." Emma's wedding ring caught the harsh light, a cold reminder of the lie she was about to sell to one of the most dangerous men alive. They'd had 2 days to prepare for this moment, 2 days to build a believable foundation for their fictional love story. 2 days that felt like a lifetime and an instant all at once. The visiting room was sterile white, divided by reinforced glass barriers. Marcus Kane sat waiting for them, and Emma understood immediately where Alexander had inherited his commanding presence. Even in an orange prison jumpsuit, Marcus Kane radiated power and menace. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his posture erect, his pale eyes sharp as surgical scalpels. "My son Marcus," said into the telephone receiver, his voice carrying clearly through the speaker system, "you look well. Prison agrees with me, but I can't say the same for freedom's effect on you." Alexander's jaw was rigid as granite. "Father." Marcus turned his attention to Emma, and she felt those cold eyes dissecting her like a laboratory specimen. "And this must be the grieving widow who's captured my son's black heart, Emma Rosewood Kane. I've had you investigated quite thoroughly." Emma lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. "Mr. Kane, please call me Marcus. We're family now, after all." His smile was all teeth and malice. "Tell me, my dear, what is it you see in my son? His charming personality? His emotional availability? His talent for destroying everything he touches?" "I see someone who chose to do the right thing when it mattered most," Emma said quietly. "Someone who sacrificed everything to stop innocent people from dying." Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking bones. How refreshingly naive. "Tell me, Emma, what did you sacrifice for love? What did you give up to become Mrs. Alexander Kane? The question was a trap. Emma could feel it. But she thought of Sophia. Pale and fragile in her hospital bed after the stress of the break-in had triggered another collapse. She thought of the destroyed paintings, years of beauty and hope reduced to shredded canvas and spilled paint. "My mother," Emma said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I sacrificed time with my dying mother to chase money for treatments that didn't work. I chose hope over presence, and she died while I was begging strangers for miracles." Alexander turned to stare at her, something flickering in his gray eyes. The truth in her words was raw and unexpected, more honest than their arrangement demanded. "Ah," Marcus leaned back, studying them both with renewed interest. "And this shared trauma brought you together. Two broken souls finding solace in mutual damage." "Something like that," Alexander said. "Show me," Marcus commanded. "Show you what?" "Show me you love her." Marcus's eyes glittered with cruel amusement. Surely the great Alexander Kane, master of corporate manipulation, can demonstrate affection. For his own wife? The challenge hung in the air like a poison cloud. Emma felt Alexander's tension radiating through the glass barrier between them and their tormentor. This was what Marcus Kane did, what he'd always done. He found people's deepest vulnerabilities and forced them to expose themselves for his entertainment. Alexander stood slowly, moved to Emma's side of the small booth. His hand was warm when it cupped her face, tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. For a moment, the prison visiting room faded away. For a moment, there was only the heat in Alexander's eyes and the thundering of Emma's heart. When he kissed her, it wasn't the calculated performance their arrangement called for. It was desperate and hungry, filled with months of unspoken longing, and the kind of need that could destroy them both. Emma's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, lost in the taste of him and the way her body came alive under his touch. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Alexander's thumb traced Emma's swollen bottom lip, and the tenderness in the gesture nearly undid her completely. "Interesting," Marcus said, and Emma remembered with startling clarity that they had an audience. That was either a magnificent performance, or you've both been lying to yourselves about the nature of this arrangement. Alexander returned to his seat, his mask sliding back into place. But Emma could still feel the phantom pressure of his lips, could still taste the coffee and desperation on her tongue. "The money," Alexander said. "Sophia needs it now." "Sure she does." Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The girl is dying, isn't she? Cancer, if my sources are correct. Such a shame. She was always the artistic one, the dreamer, too pure for this world." "Don't." Alexander's voice was deadly quiet. "Don't you dare talk about her." "Why not?" "She's my daughter too, even if she spent years hiding from her family name." Marcus smiled. "Did you know she writes me letters? Sweet rambling things? About her art and her hopes for the future. She never sends them, of course, but my people photograph them before her trash is collected." Emma felt sick. The violation was complete, obscene. Sophia's private thoughts, her most intimate hopes, had been stolen and catalogued by the father she feared. In her last letter, Marcus continued, she wrote about praying for forgiveness, for running away, for abandoning the family. "She blames herself for your betrayal, Alexander. She thinks if she'd been stronger, you wouldn't have felt compelled to destroy everything to protect her." Alexander's face had gone white as bone. "Stop. She's dying, believing she ruined your life. Isn't that poetic?" Emma watched Alexander crumble before her eyes, watched years of carefully constructed control shatter like glass. This was Marcus Kane's true genius, not pharmaceutical manipulation or financial fraud, but the precise application of emotional torture. "The money," Alexander said again, his voice breaking. "Ah, yes, the money." Marcus pulled out a thick legal document. "I've had my lawyers prepare the transfer authorization. All it requires is 3 signatures, mine, yours, and your wife's." He slid the papers through the slot in the glass barrier. Emma scanned the dense legal language, her heart sinking as she read the conditions. "This isn't just a release of funds," she said. "This is a binding contract. You're signing over guardianship of Sophia to us." "Very good," Marcus said. "See, my dear, I've decided that if you're going to save my daughter's life, you might as well take full responsibility for it. Legal guardianship, medical decision-making authority, and of course, liability for all her debts and obligations. Alexander's hands shook as he read the contract. What debts? What obligations? Marcus's smile was triumphant. Sophia has been selling more than paintings in Prague, I'm afraid. It seems my artistic daughter has developed quite a talent for acquiring and moving stolen antiquities. The Czech authorities have been building a case against her for months. Emma's world tilted. On its axis, sweet, innocent Sophia, who fed stray cats and volunteered at refugee centers, was apparently an international art thief. Lying, Alexander said. Am I? The evidence is quite compelling. Security footage of her accepting packages from known smugglers, financial records showing payments far exceeding what her legitimate art could earn. A storage unit filled with priceless artifacts stolen from museums across Europe. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Of course, if she dies before the investigation concludes, the matter becomes moot. Dead women tell no tales, as they say. Emma understood the trap completely now. Sign the contract and save Sophia's life, but become legally responsible for her crimes. Refuse to sign and let an innocent woman die to protect themselves from prosecution. How long have you known? Alexander asked. I've known since it started. Who do you think provided her with the contacts? The buyers? The expertise? Marcus's eyes glittered with malice. My daughter needed money for her treatments, and I made sure she could earn it. Family takes care of family, after all. You used her illness to turn her into a criminal. I gave her agency in her own survival, something you never understood. My boy, sometimes we have to compromise our precious morals to protect the people we love. Emma looked at Alexander, seeing the impossible choice reflected in his face. Save Sophia and destroy their own lives, or preserve their freedom and let her die. There is a third option, Marcus said, as if reading their thoughts. Emma could simply walk away, annul the marriage, disappear with a generous severance package, and leave the Kane family to sort out its own problems. The suggestion hung in the air like a lifeline and a curse. Emma could walk away clean, start over somewhere far from this family's toxic legacy. All she had to do was abandon a dying woman she'd known for 3 days, and the man she was beginning to realize she'd fallen in love with. Tick-tock, Marcus said. The offer expires when visiting hours end. What will it be, my dear? Freedom or family? Emma's signature on the contract felt like signing her own death warrant. The ink was still wet when Marcus Kane's smile widened into something that belonged in nightmares. Welcome to the family business, my dear, he said, sliding a thick manila envelope through the slot. Inside you'll find account numbers, authorization codes, and detailed instructions for the fund transfers. You'll also find photographs and documentation regarding Sophia's extracurricular activities. Consider it your insurance policy. The flight, back to Prague, passed in suffocating silence. Alexander stared out the window at the clouds below, his face carved from stone. Emma clutched the envelope containing their salvation and damnation. Feeling the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her chest, they found Sophia in the hospital, hooked to machines that monitored her failing systems with electronic precision. She looked impossibly small in the sterile white bed. Her dark hair spread across the pillow like spilled ink. The sight of her sent a knife through Emma's heart. Hey, Sophia whispered when she saw them, her voice barely audible above the beeping monitors. Did you see, Father? Alexander took his sister's hand, his careful composure finally cracking. We got the money, Soph. The treatment, the surgery, all of it. You're going to be okay. Tears slipped down Sophia's cheeks. What did it cost you? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Emma watched Alexander struggle with how much. Truth his dying sister could handle. Nothing we weren't willing to pay, Emma said softly. But Sophia's artist eyes saw too much, understood too deeply. He knows, doesn't he? About Prague, about the things I've done to pay for treatment. Alexander's face went white. Sophia, ... I'm not stupid, Alex. I know what you think of me. What everyone thinks. Sweet little Sophia, who paints pretty pictures and pretends the world is beautiful. Her laugh was bitter, broken. Pretty pictures. Don't pay for experimental cancer treatments. They don't buy time when you're dying. Emma sank into the chair beside the bed, her world reshaping itself around this new truth. How long have you been stealing? 3 years, Sophia whispered. Since the diagnosis, Father's people approached me, offered me a way to fund my own survival. I told myself it was temporary, just until I got better. But cancer doesn't care about your moral compromises. Alexander stood abruptly, pacing to the window like a caged animal. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ask for help? Because you'd already destroyed your life to stop Father. Because you'd already sacrificed everything to be the good son, the righteous one. Sophia's voice broke. I couldn't ask you to compromise your principles for me too. Emma felt the pieces of their broken family clicking into place. Alexander, consumed with guilt over his father's crimes. Sophia, dying alone and desperate, making impossible choices to survive. Marcus Kane, orchestrating their destruction from behind prison walls. The authorities, Emma said. Do they have enough evidence to prosecute? Sophia nodded weakly. More than enough. The only reason I'm not in custody is because they're waiting to see if I'll live long enough to stand trial. The cruel irony wasn't lost on any of them. Sophia needed the stolen money to live, but living meant facing prosecution for the crimes that had earned it. There's something else, Sophia continued, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. The last job, the one that finally gave me enough for the full treatment. It wasn't just any artifact. Emma's blood ran cold. What was it? The Moravian crown. Stolen from the Prague castle treasury 6 months ago. Worth $40 million and absolutely impossible to fence through normal channels. Alexander stopped pacing, his face gone ashen. Please tell me you didn't. I still have it, Sophia admitted. Hidden in the studio. I was supposed to deliver it to buyers in Moscow next week, but then I collapsed and ended up here. Emma's mind raced through the implications. The Moravian crown was one of Czech Republic's most precious national treasures. A medieval masterpiece that belonged in museums, not private collections. Its theft had made international headlines. We have to return it, Emma said. We return. I lose the money, Sophia said. Without that money, I die. If we don't return it, you'll spend what's left of your life in prison, Alexander pointed out. Sophia closed her eyes, tears leaking from beneath her lashes. Maybe that's what I deserve. Maybe this is justice. No, Emma said fiercely. You're not a criminal. You're a scared, sick young woman who was manipulated by a monster. There's a difference. She stood, pacing to the window where Prague's ancient spires reached toward a gray sky. Somewhere in this beautiful, complicated city was a medieval crown. Worth more than most people could imagine? Somewhere else, buyers were waiting to smuggle it out of the country forever. What if we could do both? Emma said suddenly. Alexander and Sophia stared at her. Both what? Save your life and return the crown. Emma turned from the window, her mind spinning with desperate possibilities. Your father gave us access to his accounts, right? $50 million? More than enough for your treatment? Blood. Money, Alexander said. Every dollar earned through suffering and death. Then let's use it for something good. Emma moved back to Sophia's bedside, taking her hand. We use Marcus's money to pay for your treatment. We return the crown to the Czech authorities. And we turn over all the evidence about the smuggling operation. Sophia's eyes widened. That would expose Father's entire network. Dozens of people, millions of dollars in illegal artifacts. Good, Alexander said, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. Let it all burn. But Emma saw the flaw in her own plan immediately. The prosecution will still have evidence against you, Sophia. You'll still face charges. Unless, Alexander said slowly, we can convince them that you were working undercover. Emma and Sophia stared at him. What? Think about it. A young woman with terminal cancer, desperate for treatment money. Perfect candidate for law enforcement to flip, to use. As an inside source against a major smuggling operation? Alexander's eyes began to shine with possibility. If we present it right, if we give them evidence of the entire network plus the Crown's recovery, they might be willing to make a deal. That's insane, Sophia whispered. No one would believe it. They might, Emma said, if we had someone credible to vouch for the story. Someone with connections in law enforcement. Alexander nodded grimly. Still have contacts from when I testified against father. FBI agents who worked the pharmaceutical case. If I called in some favors, hope flickered in Sophia's eyes for the first time since they'd arrived. You think it could work? I think it's our only chance, Emma said. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of phone calls, meetings, and desperate negotiations. Alexander leveraged every contact he'd made during his father's prosecution, calling in favors and promising cooperation. Emma coordinated with Swiss medical facilities, arranging for Sophia's transfer and treatment using Marcus Kane's blood money. But it was Sophia who made the most crucial call. Detective Novak, she said into the phone, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. This is Sophia Kane. I have information about the Moravian crown theft, and I'm ready to make a deal. The meeting took place in a secure conference room at Czech National Police Headquarters. Detective Novak was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, who looked like she'd seen every lie the world had to offer. Beside her sat representatives from Interpol and the FBI, their faces skeptical as Sophia began her carefully rehearsed confession. I've been working as an informant for 18 months, Sophia said, her voice stronger than Emma had heard it in days. My terminal diagnosis made me the perfect candidate. Desperate enough to be believable, sick enough that no one suspected ulterior motives. Detective Novak leaned forward. And you're claiming that your brother and sister-in-law knew nothing about this operation? Nothing, Sophia confirmed. They thought I was supporting myself through legitimate art sales. Diagnosis was real, the desperation was real, but my cooperation with law enforcement was also real. Alexander placed a thick folder on the table. This contains financial records, communication logs, and photographic evidence of the entire smuggling network. Names, locations, buyers, sellers, everything my sister gathered over the past year and a half. The FBI agent flipped through the documents, his eyebrows rising higher with each page. This is comprehensive. If authentic, it would dismantle one of Europe's largest antiquity smuggling operations. It's authentic, Emma said. And there's more. She slid a second folder across the table. Marcus Kane's complete financial records. Offshore accounts, shell companies, money laundering operations, spanning 3 decades. Everything he thought he'd hidden from the world. Detective Novak's eyes widened as she scanned the documents. How did you obtain these? My father-in-law made a mistake, Emma said. He trusted me with access to his accounts to save his daughter's life. He didn't realize I'd copy everything before returning it. The room fell silent as the law enforcement officials absorbed the magnitude of what they were being offered. Months of undercover work, a major smuggling network, and the financial records of one of America's most notorious criminals. The Crown, the Interpol agent said finally. Where is it? Sophia reached into her bag and placed a small key on the table. Storage unit 247 at Secure Store Prague. The Crown is in a climate-controlled case, exactly as it was when it was stolen. Detective Novak studied Sophia's pale face, searching for deception. Miss Kane, if we verify your story, if the evidence checks out and the Crown is recovered intact, the prosecutor would be willing to offer full immunity in exchange for your continued cooperation as a witness. Sophia's relief was so profound that Emma felt it across the room. And the treatment? I need to leave for Switzerland immediately. That's not our concern, the FBI agent said. Your medical care is between you and your doctors. But Detective Novak's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, Miss Kane, if your story checks out, you've done your country a great service. The Moravian crown belongs in Prague, not in some Russian oligarch's private collection. They left the police station. Emma felt the weight of months of deception finally lifting from her shoulders. They'd done it. Somehow, impossibly. They'd found a way to save Sophia's life without destroying their own. But their relief was short-lived. Alexander's phone rang as they waited for their taxi back to the hospital. His face went white as he listened to the voice. On the other end, what is it? Emma asked as he hung up. That was the hospital, Alexander said, his voice hollow. Sophia collapsed again 20 minutes ago. They're prepping her for emergency surgery. They raced through Prague's narrow streets, Emma's heart hammering against her ribs. After everything they'd sacrificed, everything they'd risked, they might still lose her. The hospital corridor stretched endlessly before them, filled with the antiseptic smell of desperation and dying hope. A surgeon in blood-stained scrubs emerged. From the operating room, his expression grim. "Mr. Kane, your sister is stable, but barely. The cancer has progressed more rapidly than we anticipated. Even with the Swiss treatment, her chances are—" He paused, searching for diplomatic words. "Limited." Alexander sank into a plastic chair, his face buried in his hands. "How long? With immediate treatment in Switzerland? Maybe 6 months? Without it?" The surgeon shrugged. Days. Emma sat beside Alexander, taking his trembling hand in hers. Through the observation window, she could see Sophia hooked to a maze of machines, her face peaceful in unconsciousness.
We
"Have to tell her," Alexander said finally. "About the marriage, about why we really came to Prague. She deserves to know the truth." Emma's heart clenched. Their fictional love story had become the foundation for everything they'd built, the lie that had saved Sophia's life. But looking at Alexander's devastated face, Emma realized the line between fiction and reality had blurred beyond recognition. "Alexander," she said softly, "what if it wasn't entirely a lie?" He looked up, his gray eyes searching her face. "What do you mean? What if somewhere along the way, in the middle of all this deception and desperation, we actually fell in love?" The question hung between them like a bridge over an abyss, terrifying and necessary. Alexander reached up to cup Emma's face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. "Emma," he whispered, and in her name she heard everything he couldn't say. Love and fear and the terrible knowledge that they'd found each other too late in the shadow of too much loss. When he kissed her this time, it tasted like goodbye. 6 months later, Emma stood in the garden of the Swiss medical facility where Sophia had spent her final weeks. The experimental treatment had bought them precious time, but not the miracle they'd hoped for. Sophia Kane had died on a Tuesday. Morning in April, surrounded by the people who loved her, her last painting still wet on the easel beside her bed. The funeral had been small, private, attended only by Emma, Alexander, and a handful of Sophia's artist friends from Prague. They'd buried her in a quiet cemetery overlooking Lake Geneva, where the mountains met the sky in perfect harmony. It was, Emma thought, exactly the kind of place Sophia would have painted. Now, 2 weeks after the service, Emma was cleaning out Sophia's studio when she found the letter. It was addressed to both of them in Sophia's elegant handwriting, hidden between the pages of a sketchbook filled with portraits of Emma and Alexander. The sketches showed them in unguarded moments, captured with an artist's eye for truth. Alexander laughing at something Emma had said. Emma sleeping against his shoulder. In a hospital waiting room. The two of them dancing slowly in Sophia's Prague studio, unaware they were being observed. Emma's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. "My dearest Alex and Emma, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're probably wondering what happens next. I know you think your marriage was just a business arrangement, a necessary fiction to save my life. But I've been watching you both for months, and I need you to understand something important. Love isn't always a lightning strike. Sometimes it's a slow burn, a gradual recognition of something that was always there. Sometimes it disguises itself as friendship or duty or shared purpose until one day you realize you can't imagine breathing without the other person in the room. You saved my life, yes, but you also saved each other. Alex, you've smiled more in these past months than in all the years since you left home. Emma, you've found your strength again after losing your mother. You've both learned that love isn't just about romance and passion. It's about showing up day after day, even when everything is falling apart. I know you're going to try to walk away from each other now. You'll tell yourselves that the arrangement is over, that you can go back to being strangers. But I painted you both for months, and I know what I saw in your faces. What you felt for each other became real somewhere along the way. Don't let Fear rob you of something beautiful. Don't let my death be the excuse you use to run from happiness. The storage unit key I gave the police wasn't the only one. There's another unit, number 362, registered under Emma's name. Inside, you'll find my real work, the paintings I never showed anyone. Consider them my wedding gift to you both, and a reminder that some things are worth fighting for. Live fully. Love bravely. Make my sacrifice mean something. Oh. My love, Sophia. Emma was crying by the time she finished reading, tears streaming down her face as she understood the magnitude of what Sophia had done. Even dying, even in her final weeks. She'd been orchestrating one last act of love. Emma. Alexander's voice came from the doorway. He'd been in Geneva handling the final legal arrangements, and he looked exhausted. What is it? She handed him the letter without speaking, watching his face transform as he read his sister's final words. When he finished, he sank into the chair across from her, the letter clutched in his hands. She knew, he said finally. She knew how I felt about you. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. How you felt? Alexander looked up, his gray eyes vulnerable and raw. I fell in love with you somewhere between Prague and Switzerland. Somewhere between watching you hold Sophia's hand during chemo and seeing you cry over her paintings. I fell in love with your courage and your kindness and the way you never gave up on people, even when they'd given up on themselves. Emma crossed the room, kneeling beside his chair. Alexander. I know it's complicated, he continued. I know our marriage started as a lie, and maybe that makes everything else feel tainted. But Sophia was right. What I feel for you became real, Emma. More real than anything else in my life. Emma reached up to cup his face, seeing her own reflection. In his eyes. The night we first met Sophia, when she asked if I loved you, I said yes. I thought I was lying, but maybe I wasn't. Maybe I was just telling a truth I wasn't ready to accept. Alexander's kiss was gentle this time, tender rather, than desperate. It tasted like grief and hope and the promise of something new, beginning from the ashes of everything they'd lost.
Hey, the storage unit,
Emma said when they broke apart. We should see what she left for us. Storage unit 362 was climate-controlled and carefully organized, filled with canvases wrapped in protective cloth. As they unwrapped each painting, Emma gasped at the beauty of Sophia's secret work. These weren't the pretty landscapes and still lifes she'd sold to tourists. These were raw, honest, emotionally devastating portraits of life and death and the space between. But it was the final painting that made Emma's breath catch. It showed a couple standing at an altar, but their faces were turned toward each other, rather than the officiant. The woman wore a simple white dress, the man a dark suit, and their hands were clasped between them like a promise. It was clearly meant to be Emma and Alexander, but painted with such love and hope that it transformed their courthouse ceremony into something sacred. At the bottom, Sophia had written a single line, "True love needs no audience but itself." She painted our real wedding, Emma whispered. Alexander's arms came around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest. Maybe that's what this was all along. Maybe everything else was just window dressing. Emma leaned into his warmth, studying the painting through tear-blurred eyes. What happens now? Do we stay married? Do we try to build something real from? All this pretense? I don't know, Alexander admitted. I only know that I don't want to lose you. I don't want to go back to being the man I was before Prague, before you taught me that love doesn't have to be a weakness. Emma turned in his arms, meeting his gaze steadily. And we don't go back. We go forward. We take what Sophia gave us, and we make it into something worthy of her sacrifice. Outside, the Swiss sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Emma thought of her mother, who died believing in love despite being abandoned by it. She thought of Sophia, who'd orchestrated their happiness from beyond the grave. She thought of all the broken pieces of their lives that had somehow fitted together into something beautiful and whole. Mrs. Kane, Alexander said softly, and this time the title didn't feel like a lie. Mr. Kane, Emma replied, and kissed him as the sun disappeared behind the peaks. They drove back to Geneva as the stars came out. Sophia's paintings carefully secured in the back of their rental car. Tomorrow, they would return to New York and figure out how to build a real marriage from the foundation of their fictional one. They would face questions and complications and the challenge of learning to love each other without the urgency of crisis driving them forward. But tonight, Emma reached across the car to take Alexander's hand, intertwining their fingers as they navigated the mountain roads toward home. Tonight, the platinum band on her finger felt like exactly what it had always been meant to be. A promise, freely given and gratefully received. In the end, Emma thought, all love stories were about choice. The choice to stay when leaving would be easier. The choice to believe when doubt felt safer. The choice to love someone not despite their damage, but because of their courage in surviving. They had chosen each other in a sterile courthouse, in a Prague hospital, in a Swiss medical facility. They had chosen each other through lies and truth, through desperate necessity and quiet recognition. Now they were choosing each other, simply because they wanted to. Because a love that began as performance had transformed into something neither of them could bear to lose. And somewhere in the star-filled darkness above them, Emma imagined Sophia's spirit watching over their journey home. Finally at peace, knowing that her brother had learned to let someone love him back. The India liked this video if the story touched your heart. Subscribe for more emotional tales, and share with someone who believes in the power of true love. And let us know in the comments. We love connecting with our global community of romance lovers.